Gentlemen, welcome back to False Count Radio. Without further ado, let's welcome Alex, the Pug Pourteau. How are you?
Hey guys, how you doing out there?
I am doing just great. It is an honor to have you on the show. You know, you trained with Skandar, Akbar, and Jim Starr. What was that like?
Well, you know, back then it was probably 1986, 1987. I trained in the back of Jim Starr's gym there in Bossier City, Louisiana, which is where I grew up. And of course, you know, many stars came in there and trained while they were on the road for Mid-South Wrestling. Star's gym was, you know, just a few miles down the road from where Bill Watts shot his TV there at Irish McNeil's Boys Club. But anyway, it was good old school training, you know, which is very, very hard to find now. And I don't know really what else to say besides that, but it was, you know, anybody being trained by Jim Starr, which a lot of people don't realize who he was. He was one of the original mask interns or mask medics out of the St. Louis territory. So, but he's a phenomenal worker, great hand, and it was an honor to be trained by the gentleman, to be honest with you.
You actually bring up, you know, that the training was a lot different back then. Can you tell, you know, our listeners in detail, you know, how it was different? I mean, I'm a wrestler, so I know what you mean, but some of our listeners might not understand. What's the difference between back then and now, training-wise?
Well, I'm going to tell you what the difference is. You know, if you didn't look like a wrestler or know somebody back then, or have something to offer this business, then it didn't matter how much money you had. Money wasn't an issue back then. It was, you know, whoever broke you in this business, their name was on the line. You know, when I broke into Dallas, Texas in 1987, you know, Jim Starr and Skandar Akbar had their name anchored to my trunks. And, you know, that meant a lot to those guys back then. And if you didn't have what it took to be a pro wrestler, or the image, or the package itself, then you just weren't put on TV. I mean, you know, unless you were just a jobber, which, of course, I started out doing that myself, and I don't mean to knock those guys because I've been there. But I'm just saying, in longevity and long term, you better have something to offer this business, or you didn't get between the ropes. And nowadays, you've got these guys that their hearts are right, but they're pizza drivers, they're tow truck drivers, they're wrestlers on the weekends. But you know what? They don't look like athletes, and that's what's run this business, because there's nowhere to learn how to work anymore the way we were trained back in the day. You know, the very last territory to run, really, besides USWA, was Puerto Rico. And I had an opportunity to spend time with both of those great territories in the late and early 90s. So, and those have faded nowadays. I mean, now Puerto Rico's still running very, very vaguely out there, 1 or 2 days a week. But the workers that are out there are, you know, they're older now. You know, of course, you still got some solid finishes out there with the Colognes and Savio Vega running things out there with 2 different companies. But it's a whole different world out there now. I tell you, man, the business has changed a lot.
I would agree with you. Viper, do you got a question? All right. Jimmy Falcon, go ahead.
How did you get your start in world-class championship wrestling?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I did. There was an arena in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is where I grew up, and I was about 17 years old. I was a junior in high school. I loaded up a TV and a VCR in my pickup truck and drove down to the arena, and World Class was in town that night, and it was the Freebirds with the Von Erichs, Al Perez, Chris Adams, Iceman, Tim Brooks, all those guys that worked that Texas area. They were in Shreveport that night, and I literally walked in the back of the arena with a TV and a VCR and set it up, and I went and shook Akbar's hand, and I asked him if he would mind taking a look at something that I had put together for him. And you know, of course, shaking his hand and him knowing Jim Starr, and you know, with a couple other things there, led him to that TV. And he looked at it and he said, well, you know, Alex, I might have something for you over in Dallas, just a little bit of a little TV right now, but, you know, we might be able to get you started over there. And, you know, that was really my first break. So I you know, I paid probably $50-$60 for a ticket on a bus to go to Dallas, 180 miles from where I lived, and went and made $75 for TV. So, you know, by the time I got something to eat and, you know, had a beer, well, I can't say I had a beer at 17, but I did. But, by the time I got a little bite to eat and got back on the bus, man, I was barely breaking even. You know what? But I was getting more than a paycheck. I was getting experience. I was working with Al Perez, Jimmy Jack Funk, Steve and Sean Simpson, Kerry and Kevin Von Erich, Chris Adams, Iceman. So I was learning from the best right down the road from Louisiana, and that's how I got my break.
You bring up the Von Erichs. What were they like as promoters?
Well, you know, Fritz was the promoter. Kevin and Kerry were the ones that was the talent that I worked with in World Class. I didn't really didn't see a lot on the promoter side because, you know, I was a kid coming in there doing TV on Friday nights, and then the very next night, which was Saturday night, Channel 11, World Class Championship Wrestling, I would just watch myself on TV. And then Monday morning, I was back in school and going to football practice in the afternoon. So I wasn't running as a promotion on the loop like those guys were. I was just doing TV and then coming back home. And like I said, I'd watch myself on TV Saturday night, and then I'd get up and go to school like the rest of the crew, all the other students, on Monday morning.
Okay. What led to your departure from World Class Championship Wrestling?
Well, you know, that was really, you know, my first TV break was World Class, and my departure was really my first break with a character, which was when Jerry Jarrett and Jeff Jarrett walked up and said, hey, we could use you in Tennessee as one of the Dirty White Boys to come in and work with Tony Anthony, which was the original Dirty White Boy, him and Lynn Denton. So I grabbed it. I went out and got some Harley boots and got some black trunks and tights, a leather jacket and bandana, and flew into Nashville a week later, and I was one of the Dirty White Boys in the USWA. So that was really my first break in a real territory that I actually made a loop.
You actually bring up Len Denton. I'm from Oregon, which is where he currently resides. What was it like working with him?
Well, Len Denton, I'd never worked with Len Denton. I tagged with his partner, Tony Anthony. So if you're asking about Tony Anthony, which is who I was working with, Tony was a phenomenal hand, and I learned a ton about tag team wrestling from this guy. I mean, you know, this is one of the guys that, because I used to watch the original Dirty White Boys in Louisiana when I was just a mark watching TV. So I was actually tagging 2 years later with someone that I used to watch in the ring in Louisiana for Bill Watts. So it was a phenomenal time. You know, it was an honor to be able to come in and be a part of one of the greatest tag teams ever in that era, which was the Dirty White Boys.